Hey guys, how are you all? I'm just making this video to share a few basic writing tips for all of us active book writers out there. And before I get started, I really just want to emphasize, if you're in that beginning stage where you're coming up with a story for the very first time, you've got a new idea, you're excited about it, don't get too hung up on stuff like wording or does this paragraph sound cheesy. Don't focus on stuff like that right now. Just work on fleshing out your plot, flesh out your characters. That's what's important right now. But if you are at that stage where you're actually sitting down at your keyboard getting ready to write, or maybe you have written a lot already and you're going back to revise what you've got, I've done a ton of editing and revising, and I read a lot and I write a lot, and I've revised stories for the past few years, and I have picked up a lot of tips from what I've seen on stuff that works really, really well, and then stuff that maybe gets used all the time but that doesn't work at all. So I just want to share what I have picked up with you guys, so here goes. One really important thing that you want to pay a lot of attention to is your beginning, because the first page or two is really going to determine whether the reader is going to stay hooked or not. It's going to determine whether or not an agent or publisher wants to look at your book. It really makes a big difference, and you want to have some type of conflict or hook or something to really draw in the readers on the first couple of pages. It doesn't necessarily have to be the main conflict of the story, but you want to have some type of sense of urgency right off the bat to really bring people in. So there's a lot of different types of beginnings that I've seen that are done a lot, but they don't have that hook, or they don't, they're kind of cliche. So I'll give you a few things to just kind of watch for in the beginning, and just make sure that you're not doing anything boring with the first couple of pages of your book. One beginning that you really want to avoid is the type where the main character wakes up, it's in the morning, and they just go about their daily chores, getting dressed, getting ready for the day, and they just think, and in their thoughts you just kind of info dump about the world, the way their world is and the history of it, or whatever issues the character's having. Even if you've built a really interesting world, or even if they have gripping things going on, just that type of info dump, it's not very engaging, so you want to try to avoid that. And I get there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. No rule is going to apply 100% of the time. So I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with having a part that involves somebody waking up, or that there's nothing wrong with having a scene of someone thinking about, like, oh, these are all the issues that I have going on. There's nothing wrong with those things in themselves per se. It's just that you want to avoid that that kind of cliche beginning where the person gets out of bed and they think about, oh, this is the history of where I live, and this is the way that my world is, and this is all these issues that I've had with my antagonist. You just kind of want to avoid that. I've just seen a lot of instances where it just gets very lengthy and it doesn't really work. Another thing that you want to watch out for is the cliche where the character goes over to a mirror and they look at themselves in the mirror, and as they're doing that they think about their appearance. Really nobody cares that much what your character looks like. Either way, when they read a book, most people are going to have some type of image in their head already of what they envision the character to look like, so it doesn't hurt to weave in a few little things throughout the story. You can say, she tucked back a lock of her brown hair, but you don't want to spend a paragraph saying she looked into the mirror and her blue eyes gazed back at her. They had the same shade as the sky on a clear summer day, and her hair went down past her elbows, and it was the color of freshly grown hay in the field. First of all, that's called purple prose. It's just kind of cheesy. It just seems kind of over the top and not something you want to do for that regard. And then also too, it's just not very interesting again, and people don't want to read a few paragraphs of what somebody looks like. They would rather spend more time reading about watching action unfold or watching interactions between characters. um, long descriptions about appearances and also places. It really works better if you weave it into the novel in little bits here and there, where the readers can pick up the small pieces and put together the bigger picture as they read, but you don't want to actually spend big chunks of text just describing things. Another big, super important part of any story is going to be your character development, and this goes for not just your main protagonist, but also your antagonists, your secondary characters, people who they meet along the way. The most noteworthy things in a book are the really out there, eccentric, really well fleshed out characters. And the best way to approach that is to focus on showing rather than telling, and you can paint a really clear picture of any character by showing how they react to certain events in their situation around them and how they talk, how they come across when they're talking. Maybe they come across one way when they talk to one character, but then when they're talking to a different character, they come across totally different. Because a lot of people in real life are that way, so it's realistic. Showing how they talk and react is a really accurate way to paint a clear picture of them. And the things that you want to focus on when you're developing your character are what makes them tick, what makes them motivated, what do they want to work towards, what do they want to avoid, what makes them feel angry or scared or happy or sad, what types of events in your story are going to be the turning point for these characters, and how do they react in different types of scenarios. And it can even be really helpful if you're struggling with character development. Talk to a friend who's also a writer, or talk to somebody who knows what your story is about, and just talk about your character, make up scenarios, say what would they do if this happened, how would they handle it if this event happened. But focusing on their triggers and on what makes them tick is a really big part of developing characters and fleshing them out. I've seen people make a lot of mistakes with character development, especially when they use those profile sheets that have questions like, what's your character's favorite food, what day were they born, what day of the week do they like the best, what was their grandmother's occupation. And I'm not saying that all of those questions in themselves are unimportant. Sometimes something like a person's maybe events surrounding their childhood do play a big part in the story, but for the most part you really don't want to waste your time working on little details of things like that. Just focus on the bigger picture, focus on what makes them tick as a person, rather than really inconsequential things that get kind of forced into the story. And another big thing is the way the plot moves along. There's something that you want to avoid called Deus ex machina. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, but there it is. And that is the situation where you have your main character is in a really tight spot, they're about to die, but then at the very last minute somebody comes by to save them, or maybe they couldn't do a particular spell or skill, but then it comes to them at the last moment, or they something happens to thwart the antagonist that's out of the protagonist's control. You want to really avoid that, because maybe it can work once or twice is pushing it, but the reader will really start to get the feeling that they're being used. They just kind of get the sense that, hey, no matter what happens, even if the character is really inadequate, they're always going to have the day saved at the last minute, so I already kind of know what's going to happen, and it just kind of cheapens the story. It takes out a lot of suspense. So you want to have it where if the character gets out of a situation, it should be through the efforts of their own creativity, their own strategy, saying, okay, how do I handle this? Perhaps another character is the one that does the mental work in getting them out of the situation, but you want to have the hero's progress be through his or her own merits rather than through these ambiguous outside last-minute rescues. And another big thing to think about is your character doesn't always have to win every single trial that they go through in the story. And I personally prefer when the character does win at the very end, but as you're moving along the book, in real life we don't always win every obstacle that happens, so sometimes it is better to have them fall on their face sometimes, especially in the case where maybe you're developing writer's block or maybe you're really stuck, because maybe you think, okay, my character's in this situation. If I were in that situation, I don't know what I would do. I don't know how I would get out of that, so I don't really know how to help my character get out of that situation either. I've definitely been in that situation as a writer, and it can definitely get me stuck sometimes, but something that I found that helps a lot is that if you're in that situation, just let the character explore what happens if the character doesn't succeed at that particular part. Maybe because of their failure in that aspect, maybe a bigger problem comes down on them that gives more conflict and more fuel for the story to unfold. So sometimes the character can fail. That is okay for them to do that, and it's better to do it that way. If you're stuck on, oh, I don't know how they would get out of this, it's better to just let them not succeed and let their problems get bigger as a result, and then they have more conflict and more issues to overcome. That is so much more suspenseful than if you just have these situations where their mentor swoops in to save them, or they suddenly realize that they're able to have this magic skill at the last minute. Try to have everything within the character's control, or else spice it up a little bit and let bad things happen to them sometimes. Another thing I want to talk about is the ending. We all talked about before how with the beginning of your story, it's the first few pages, it's what determines whether or not a reader will continue to read your book. The ending is the same way. It's the last impression that they have. It's what they're going to take with them. So you really want the ending to be something that makes the reader feel like it was worth their time, and not something that just is very flat or kind of letdowny. You want to try to avoid the endings that are just, oh, it was all a dream, or oh, it turned out that what they were working towards wasn't important at all. You want to avoid the endings that just make the reader feel like they kind of wasted their time. And with the endings, it is actually ideal if you know your ending when you start to write. If you have when you're starting out, you have that general concept of what the main conflict is, what all the beginning issues are, but if you have your ending planned out too, what is the main character going to be up against at the very end? What is their final showdown going to be? What characters are going to be involved in the ending? What will happen? What are the main things that lead up to it? If you have all those planned out when you are starting to write, you're in a really good spot, because then you've got point A, you've got point B. All of your middle plot points are kind of the bridge that gets you from the beginning to the end. And then if you get stuck in the middle, or if you aren't quite sure what direction to take something in, you have that ending to use as a reference point and say, okay, how will this get me to here? So this way your plot isn't just going to go on and on for 500 pages without having an end in sight. So you do want to have the ending in your head, even if it's in a very general sense. You do want to know where you're going. And one thing to really focus on when you're planning or writing the ending of your story is incorporating the theme. So what is your book about in terms of the themes or messages that you're trying to convey, if that's the case for you, and how does the ending show that? So if your book is about facing your fears, at the ending the character should confront a major fear of theirs or something that's been holding them back. Or if your book is about overcoming some internal issue that they've struggled with, the ending should be a big, major scene where they have to do that. I once read a story where the main character was afraid of heights and afraid of storms, and that was always kind of their Achilles heel. And then at the end they have to do this battle on a bridge in a lightning storm. So it's a lot more powerful, in my opinion, if you're able to really tie in the theme in your ending. But you don't want to do it in a way that's really lectury or preachy, or that goes so over the top that you're hammering it in and just making the reader feel lectured. But if you have that significance in your ending, it really goes a long way. I know that as writers, a big thing that we hear a lot is with developing characters, we don't want to make them so picture perfect, cookie cutter-ish so they're not real. But I've read a lot of stories where it seems like the writer, they have that same worry about their ending, with not wanting it to seem too perfect, and so they tone it down. And it's true that you don't want your ending to be totally smooth sailing, because that takes out all the excitement. There should be a lot of, difficulty and struggle that they have to overcome at the end. But the best endings that have really blown me away as a reader, and I think for most people, based on talking to people and talking about stories, the endings that really seem to stand out the most are the ones where the reader, the main character, does have a very big, momentous task to step up to. Like in Alice in Wonderland, the recent remake, where she has to slay the Jabberwocky at the very end. It's a very big task, but it's very dramatic. Or Harry Potter, where he has to defeat Voldemort. Or Lord of the Rings, going to Mount Doom. Or a really good one, in my opinion, is in the His Dark Materials trilogy, in the third book, where she goes and she actually lets all of the spirits of all the people out of the world of the dead. In all those stories, the characters do have very big, momentous tasks where they step up to the plate. And I've read some stories that go the other way, where the author is maybe worried about their character seeming too perfect, so they tone down the ending a lot, and that can actually have the opposite effect. If the character has been not succeeding the whole way, if they fail a lot of the times, but they keep trying and then they do succeed at the end, that is very impactful. And just try to have your ending stand out. Make sure that your ending is important, and make sure that it is conclusive with wrapping up your story, highlighting the main themes and tying them together, and it is the last thing that the readers will take with them, so make it count. That is all that I have for today. I do plan on uploading more videos talking about more specific, in-depth how-tos with regards to character development and plot development. I know that a lot of tips and videos and articles out there talk about, what to do or what not to do as a writer, but sometimes there's not a lot of concrete how to apply this advice tips. So I do plan on making some more videos like that go in a little deeper. If you have any topics that you want me to talk about or any ideas, definitely leave me a note in the comments and I'll address it at some point. And thank you guys very much for watching, and I will see you all soon.